After 8 long years of looking after my sister, I thought I knew everything about her. I had spent nearly a decade making sure she was comfortable, safe, and happy after her accident left her paralyzed. Every day was a routine of helping her with the simplest things: getting out of bed, bathing, feeding, attending therapy sessions, paying bills, and making sure she never felt alone. I put my own life on hold, giving up my social life, my hobbies, and even my career dreams to make sure she had what she needed. It was exhausting, but I told myself it was worth it because she was my sister, and family comes first. Sophie, despite everything, could be surprisingly sweet at times. She smiled, joked, and sometimes told me I was the best sister anyone could have. Those moments made the exhaustion feel lighter. But lately, something had been off. Sophie had started spending a lot of time talking on the phone, whispering behind closed doors, and sneaking out little secrets that didn't make sense to me. That alone wouldn't have worried me, except she had a boyfriend now, Ryan. Ryan seemed like the perfect guy on the surface. Charming, polite, always complimenting Sophie in public, and acting caring toward me whenever he came around. But there was something in the way he talked to her privately that made my stomach twist. He often suggested things in subtle tones, as if he was trying to push her in a direction I didn't understand. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself I was being paranoid. After all, I had devoted my entire life to her care. Maybe I was just tired, overthinking every little thing. Still, the feeling of unease never fully went away. I began noticing the little things. How Sophie would roll her eyes when I reminded her of therapy, or how she sighed dramatically when I asked if she needed help with anything. And Ryan, well, he always seemed to know exactly what to say to get her to do what he wanted. I didn't like it, but I tried to focus on my role as her sister, thinking perhaps it was normal for her to feel independent, to have a private life. I never imagined, though, that after all I had sacrificed, after every sleepless night, every moment of my personal life I gave up, I would one day hear her say something that would cut through every ounce of loyalty I had felt. That moment came when I accidentally overheard a conversation she had with Ryan. A conversation so shocking that it made me question everything I had believed about her. For the first time in 8 years, I felt a wave of disbelief and hurt so deep I didn't know how to process it. It was a truth I wasn't ready to accept, and yet it was undeniable. Everything I had done, every sacrifice I had made, suddenly felt like it had been taken for granted. And at that moment, I knew my life, and our relationship, would never be the same again. I had always dreamed of building a career, moving out on my own, and having a life that was fully mine. But the moment Sophie's accident happened, all those dreams were put on hold. I left my job at a marketing firm, the one I had worked so hard to get into, because her care needed me more than anything else. Nights out with friends, weekend trips, even quiet mornings to myself, all of that disappeared. Every hour of my day revolved around her needs. Making sure she ate on time, managing her therapy appointments, keeping the house in order, and simply being there when she needed someone to talk to. It was exhausting, but I told myself I was doing the right thing. To the outside world, Sophie seemed like the sweetest sister anyone could have. She would laugh at my jokes, smile brightly when visitors came, and often tell me how grateful she was. People would comment on how lucky I was to have such a charming sister. And in public, she was perfect, polite, funny, and grateful. But behind closed doors, I began to notice little things that didn't add up. She would sigh when I reminded her of appointments, complain about minor inconveniences, and occasionally make offhand comments that hinted at frustration with me. It was subtle, something I could almost convince myself wasn't real, but it stung nonetheless. Then came Ryan. At first, I welcomed him. He seemed caring and respectful, and I wanted Sophie to be happy. But over time, his influence became clear. He started making little remarks that made me question myself, how I handled her care, whether I was too strict, whether I was overprotective. Sometimes he would compliment her in ways that made it seem like she could do better without me hovering over her. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe I was imagining things. But he had a way of planting doubt in Sophie's mind and, unintentionally or not, making me feel like my years of sacrifice meant less than they should. I realized that Sophie's charming exterior and Ryan's subtle words were slowly changing the dynamic between us. The trust and bond one had spent years nurturing now felt fragile. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing behind my back, something I wasn't supposed to see. It was as if all the love and care I had given was being taken for granted, and I couldn't understand why the person I had devoted my life to could act this way. Every day, I found myself watching them interact, trying to read the small signs of manipulation and hidden resentment. It hurt to see Sophie laugh and smile at Ryan while giving me a look that felt distant, almost calculating. I kept reminding myself that I was her sister, that my role was to protect and support her. But deep down, I started wondering if my devotion had blinded me to the truth. And though I continued to care for her as I always had, a seed of doubt had been planted. A doubt that would grow into something I could no longer ignore. It started with small things that made my stomach twist. I noticed Sophie whispering to Ryan more often, shutting the door behind her, and laughing in a way that didn't feel genuine. I didn't think much of it at first, thinking she just needed private time with her boyfriend. But then, one evening, I overheard fragments of her complaining about me. "She's too controlling," Sophie muttered, her voice low but filled with annoyance. "I can't do anything without her breathing down my neck." My heart sank. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything I had done for her, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment I gave up for her comfort, she was framing me as controlling? I felt a sharp twist of betrayal, but also confusion. Maybe I had been overbearing without realizing it. Maybe she really did see me that way. Ryan didn't correct her. In fact, he nodded along quietly, his face calm, but there was a strange look in his eyes, almost like he was agreeing with her. It hit me harder than I expected. I felt unworthy, like my entire role as a sister had been twisted into something negative. For the first time, I questioned myself. Was I really too controlling? Had my devotion somehow become a burden to her? The guilt mixed with frustration. I loved her so deeply, and yet here she was speaking against me, painting me as the villain in her private world. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that people vent sometimes and that maybe she didn't mean it. But then the little hints kept showing up. She would sigh exaggeratedly when I reminded her about therapy, complain about how I ruined her independence, and occasionally give Ryan a look that made me feel invisible. It became harder and harder to ignore. The more I saw, the more I realized she wasn't as grateful as she appeared. Publicly, she smiled, thanked me, and acted sweet. But behind closed doors, there was a growing resentment I hadn't noticed before. I felt like a fool for believing all those smiles and thank yous meant everything. Every interaction now carried a weight of suspicion. Every small complaint or roll of her eyes felt like confirmation that something was wrong. My heart ached because I couldn't understand how the sister I had cared for all these years could feel trapped by my love and effort. I tried to hold my emotions together, pretending I didn't hear her, continuing to care for her as before. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. Something had shifted between us, and I knew I couldn't ignore it forever. The feeling that I was being taken for granted, and worse, that she was speaking against me, gnawed at me constantly. And in the quiet moments when she and Ryan weren't around, I found myself asking questions I had never imagined. Had I really failed her? Or was there a side of her I had never seen, one that I needed to prepare myself for? One afternoon, I was passing by the living room when I heard Sophie's voice, low and urgent, coming from the other side of the door. At first, I didn't want to eavesdrop, but something about the tone made me pause. I stopped in my tracks, straining to hear, and what I overheard made my blood run cold. "She doesn't even know," Sophie whispered to Ryan. "I don't actually need her help anymore. I've been planning this for a while. The inheritance, I can get it early if I play my cards right. And honestly, her care is suffocating. I can't stand it anymore." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled, and my chest felt heavy as if someone had shoved a weight into it. Every memory of the past 8 years, the sleepless nights, the canceled plans, the moments I gave up for her comfort, flashed before me. Every sacrifice, every effort, every time I had put her needs above my own, suddenly felt like it had been taken for granted, manipulated, and dismissed. I backed away, my mind racing. I had devoted my life to her, never asking for anything in return, and here she was plotting behind my back. Betrayal burned through me like fire. I felt anger, yes, but also a deep sadness that gnawed at my very core. The sister I had loved, protected, and sacrificed for had been hiding this secret ambition, this resentment, and this plan from the very person who had devoted her life to her well-being. Tears welled in my eyes, but I held them back, unable to let her see how much this hurt. Disbelief mingled with heartbreak. How could she say these things about me? How could she plan something so selfish while pretending to be grateful every single day? I felt like I had been living in a lie, blind to her true feelings all this time. I stood frozen, listening as she and Ryan discussed their plan further. Every word they spoke was like a punch to my chest. I couldn't believe that after everything I had done, I had been betrayed so completely. My emotions twisted together: pain, shock, anger, and a growing sense of resolve. I realized that I could not ignore this. I could not pretend it didn't happen, and I certainly could not let it continue without consequences. For the first time in years, I felt a shift inside me. The hurt was unbearable, but it also sparked a determination I hadn't known I had. I had to protect myself, and I had to make sure that what Sophie thought she could get away with would not succeed. The betrayal cut deep, but it also opened my eyes to the reality I had been blind to for too long. I quietly retreated, my heart heavy, my mind racing with the knowledge that my life, and our relationship, would never be the same again. After overhearing Sophie's shocking words, I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. My mind raced with questions, hurt, and anger. Part of me wanted to storm into the room, confront her immediately, and demand an explanation. But another part of me knew that reacting in the heat of the moment could make me look rash, maybe even guilty in some twisted way. I couldn't risk letting my emotions give her an advantage. I spent the next few days thinking carefully about what to do. Every interaction with Sophie and Ryan now carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I noticed their little exchanges, the glances, the whispers, and I realized how carefully they had been manipulating the situation. It hurt deeply, but it also gave me clarity. If I wanted justice, if I wanted her to face the truth of her actions, I needed a plan. One that would protect me and expose her without making me seem vengeful or petty. So I began to observe quietly, keeping my distance emotionally while staying fully aware of their conversations and behavior. I started noting inconsistencies in Sophie's words, contradictions in her actions, and little manipulations she tried to get away with. I didn't confront her yet. Instead, I let the information sink in, collecting evidence of her true intentions. At the same time, I worked on maintaining a calm exterior. I smiled, helped her as usual, and even acted more patient than ever. I wanted her to feel secure, to continue revealing herself without realizing I knew everything. I realized that the right moment to confront her wouldn't be impulsive. It would be precise, deliberate, and undeniable. I also thought about Ryan. He had been complicit in her secret, silently supporting her plan. If I could show him the truth in a way that made him see Sophie's selfishness clearly, he might distance himself, leaving her vulnerable. The idea wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about exposing the betrayal so that they both faced the consequences of their actions. Every day, I rehearsed how I would handle the situation, imagining different scenarios and outcomes. I knew I had to stay strong, calm, and strategic. One wrong word, one emotional outburst, and Sophie could twist the story, painting me as the villain. But if I stayed patient, collected the proof, and confronted them at the right moment, there would be no way for her to deny what she had done. I could feel a small sense of control returning to me. For the first time since the accident, I realized that even though I had been hurt deeply, I wasn't powerless. I could protect myself, reclaim my dignity, and ensure that betrayal didn't win. I wasn't ready to act yet, but I knew the moment was coming. And when it did, I would be ready. Once I decided to stay calm and wait for the right moment, I knew I had to gather proof of Sophie's true intentions. I started paying closer attention to every word she said and every action she took. I didn't want to confront her blindly. I needed evidence that could show exactly how selfish and manipulative she had been all these years. I began quietly documenting her lies. Little things at first. How she twisted stories about me to Ryan, exaggerated my controlling behavior, and complained about small acts of care I had done out of love. I kept notes in my journal, remembering the exact words and situations. I also started noticing patterns. How she tried to manipulate Ryan to see me as overbearing, how she would subtly make me feel guilty for helping her, and how she laughed about taking advantage of my sacrifices when she thought no one was listening. Opportunities to expose her started appearing naturally. Sometimes she would brag to Ryan about bending me to her will or act innocent while implying that I was unreasonable. I paid attention and waited for the perfect moment to use those moments to my advantage. I would ask questions casually during conversations, prompting her to repeat little lies or exaggerations. Each time I made mental notes. She didn't suspect that I was listening carefully, recording her words in my mind like evidence ready to be used. Sophie became increasingly overconfident. She laughed more, teased Ryan about how easy it was to manipulate me, and even dismissed any suggestions that she might be wrong. The more confident she grew, the more careless she became. She didn't realize that her every word, her every attempt to make me look bad, was being watched and remembered. That carelessness was exactly what I needed. At the same time, I kept my outward behavior calm and supportive. I smiled when she joked, helped her when she asked, and acted patient, making it seem as if I hadn't heard anything unusual. The contrast between my quiet observation and her overconfidence made me feel a small sense of power returning. Every day, I grew more certain that I could expose her in a way that would leave no doubt. I didn't need to yell or argue. All I needed was the right moment to reveal the truth. And the more she plotted, the more obvious her manipulations became. The tension in the house was subtle but growing. Sophie didn't see it, but I did. Each lie she told, each attempt to undermine me, only added fuel to the plan forming in my mind. I wasn't acting yet, but I was preparing. Step by step, I was turning the betrayal against her, waiting until the time was perfect to bring everything to light and make sure she couldn't escape the consequences. I started using what I knew in small, careful ways. I didn't want to attack Sophie directly or make it obvious that I had overheard anything. Instead, I created moments where her own words and behavior would expose her without me saying much at all. It began with simple conversations in front of family and close friends. I would mention something gently, something she had said privately, but in a neutral tone, just enough to make her slip. For example, if she had told Ryan she hated a certain task I did for her, I would casually bring it up in front of him and a family member. "Sophie, do you still want me to help with your schedule, or do you want more independence?" I would ask. It seemed harmless, but it made her freeze. She would stumble through her words, unsure of how to answer without contradicting her complaints. Each small moment chipped away at the image she had built. Slowly, I started inviting people over. Our aunt, a cousin, even a neighbor who loved Sophie. When they visited, I let Sophie speak freely, knowing she would eventually reveal the selfishness she tried to hide. And she did. She snapped over small things, complained about my care, and acted entitled in ways she usually hid. People began noticing. They exchanged looks, raised eyebrows, and subtly questioned her attitude. Ryan, who used to defend every word she said, began to look confused. He would watch her contradict herself, acting sweet one second and irritated the next. He started asking gentle questions, the kind that suggested doubt. "Sophie, didn't you say you wanted Emma's help?" Or, "I thought you appreciated when she handled that?" Each time he did, her face tightened with panic. She tried to cover her tracks, but the more she talked, the more tangled her lies became. She didn't realize that all of this was happening because I had simply stepped back and let her own behavior reveal the truth. As the days passed, Sophie began to feel the shift. Friends who used to praise her now seemed distant. Family who adored her started noticing her ungrateful attitude. She sensed the change but couldn't understand how everything was falling apart so quickly. The isolation hit her slowly but painfully. She tried harder to control the narrative, but that only exposed her more. For the first time in years, I felt a strange emotional release. I didn't feel happy about her downfall, but I felt relieved. I wasn't doing anything cruel. I was only allowing her real behavior to come to light. And because I stayed calm, patient, and kind throughout, no one saw me as the problem. I held on to the moral high ground without needing to argue or defend myself. People saw the truth on their own. Sophie, who once felt confident and untouchable, now struggled to keep herself together. She looked at me differently, not with superiority, but with fear, as if she sensed that the world she had built was starting to crumble. And I knew this was only the beginning of the shift she had never expected. The moment I had been waiting for eventually came on its own. Sophie had grown careless, snapping at me in front of Ryan, contradicting herself during conversations, and showing her resentment openly without realizing how much he had begun noticing. One evening, after she had made a particularly harsh comment about how I loved controlling her life, I saw the confusion on Ryan's face turn into something sharper, doubt mixed with disappointment. That was when I knew it was time. I waited until the house was quiet and asked both of them to sit in the living room. My voice was steady, but inside, my heart was pounding. Sophie looked annoyed, as if expecting another reminder about her therapy. Ryan looked tense, sensing something heavier coming. I took a deep breath and began calmly, explaining what I had heard weeks ago. I repeated her exact words, the ones about not needing my help, the inheritance plan, and how my care was suffocating. Every detail came out clear and steady. Sophie's face drained of color. She tried to speak, but I continued gently, listing the lies she told about me, the manipulations she whispered to Ryan, and the ungrateful remarks she made behind closed doors. I didn't yell or accuse. I just spoke the truth she thought I would never know. Then I presented the small pieces of evidence I had collected. Her contradictions in front of others, her exaggerated stories, her attempts to twist every situation. I didn't need to show recordings or messages. Her own behavior had been enough to expose her. Ryan sat in silence at first, but as the details came together, his expression shifted from confusion to shock. He realized he had been manipulated too, pushed into seeing me as controlling, encouraged to believe lies Sophie had fed him. When I mentioned how she bragged about playing her cards right to get her inheritance early, his jaw clenched. When I finally stopped talking, Sophie panicked. She tried to deny everything, but every word she said only confirmed what I had revealed. She contradicted herself again and again, proving the truth without me needing to say another thing. Ryan finally stood up, looking at her as if he no longer recognized her. He said softly but firmly that he couldn't stay with someone who lied so easily and used people who cared for her. Sophie begged him to listen, reaching for him, but he pulled his hand away. The silence that followed was heavy. Sophie sat frozen, humiliated, realizing her manipulations had collapsed right in front of her. She tried to blame stress, pain, and fear, but nothing could cover the truth now. Everything she had built on lies had fallen apart. For the first time in years, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I hadn't wanted to hurt her, but she had left me no choice. And now the consequences had finally reached her. Not because I attacked her, but because she had exposed herself. Emma felt a calm strength growing inside her after everything fell apart. For the first time in a long while, she stopped trying to fix things that were never her responsibility. She began setting clear boundaries, making it known that she would no longer allow anyone, including Sophie, to use her kindness as a weakness. She helped only where it was truly necessary, but she refused to let Sophie lean on her the way she once did. It wasn't out of anger anymore. It was out of respect for herself, something she had ignored for far too long. Sophie, on the other hand, finally had to face the reality she had created. People who once believed her stories now avoided her because the truth was out in the open. She felt the weight of her own choices as her social circle shrank and opportunities slowly slipped away. The financial mess she had ignored for months became harder to hide, and Emma didn't step in to rescue her this time. Sophie struggled with guilt, knowing she had pushed away the one person who had always cared for her. Emma didn't celebrate Sophie's downfall, but she didn't carry the burden of it either. She focused on rebuilding herself, her confidence, her peace, her future. With every step she took forward, she felt stronger. Her life became quieter but fuller, shaped by choices that came from clarity instead of fear. She learned that justice didn't always look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it simply meant walking away with dignity, while the person who tried to break you is left to face their own reflection. In the end, Emma's strength spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. She turned betrayal into a new beginning, proving to herself that surviving wasn't enough. She could rise, rebuild, and reclaim her happiness on her own terms. Emma slowly found herself surrounded by people who genuinely cared for her. Her friends and family stayed close, reminding her that she was not alone and that her strength was something worth admiring. They supported her through the final moments of healing, and when she finally felt ready, they celebrated her courage. It wasn't a loud celebration, but a warm and comforting one, filled with quiet pride and the understanding that she had faced something painful and come out stronger. Emma took time to reflect on everything she had been through. The betrayal had left deep marks, but she no longer looked at them with sadness. Instead, she saw them as reminders of her ability to rise even when life tried to pull her down. She admitted to herself that it had hurt deeply, but she also recognized how these moments uncovered a part of her she didn't know existed. The part that could stay calm, make smart decisions, and protect herself with grace. As she looked back, she realized something important. Love and loyalty only have meaning when they come from the right people. She learned that not everyone who stands close truly stands with you. Real care deserves respect, and anyone who tries to destroy your peace does not deserve a place in your life. Sophie's betrayal had caused so much confusion, but in the end, it could not survive against Emma's patience, intelligence, and quiet courage. With this understanding, Emma stepped into the future with a clear heart. She carried her lessons with her, not as bitterness, but as wisdom. She knew now that strength is not just about fighting back. It's also about knowing when to let go, when to protect your peace, and when to trust yourself above all. Her story ended not with anger, but with clarity and a new sense of freedom, as she finally closed the door on the past and walked confidently toward a life she could truly call her own.